I have a question, Pete. Can you talk more about, you've mentioned you had to have several items in place for this to be as successful as it has been so far. I'm wondering if you can talk more about how you've been able to sort of foster that relationship with leadership and the needed governance to sort of make this successful, but also the processes in place that you had to have in order for this to be that next big step.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was probably getting our Medigate in, because we have to, identify all the equipment on the network, and there's really no way to do that, or a tool that does that for us for the IoT stuff. And I think, looking at how we were going to do it before, which was going to have a third party come in and identify all our network devices, and write down the IP address and MAC address and give that all out to us. It's really only a snapshot in time. And the other thing is, you have a lot of rental equipment that's coming in as well on the network too, right? That, you gotta validate their patching and so forth of medical devices. And just an example of that is ultrasounds and infusion pumps. They all come onto the wireless network and so forth. So we wanted a tool that would be able to help us be able to manage that and see, not just rentals, but what new devices were going on the network. So we could be proactive, to patch those devices. And when I was talking to leadership about that, I think the biggest win for us was, we don't want something bad to happen within our hospital. I think we all agree with that. We don't want to have something bad actor come in and take control of something. I don't want to be one of those that, take hostage our infusion pumps and we can't, we have to pay a ransom. So, I think going through governance and so forth, it was a big, I followed the processes for the IT governance and presented it that way. And it was a big win for not just HTM, but for the organization as well.
I think you make a valid point, because I think a lot of times, there's always this sort of, well, there's just too many, much to do here. So they maybe push medical device security to the side. Maybe Olin can jump in too. We can talk more about why this should be a mission imperative, even if you're not quite ready for this specific program, but how you can begin to sort of chip away at medical devices and make it a more tangible task.
Yeah.
Well, I might chime in. So, Jessica, I think for Pete, he and Ron and that organization, as I mentioned, they're proactive. He has a lot of initiative. They work very well together. All of the business units there, which isn't always the case. So that's an area for a lot of organizations that's an area, if you're going to be successful in enterprise security initiatives and risk reduction, you obviously have to have that collaboration and everybody pulling in the same direction. So that is something that THR's got going for them for sure. And I think that obviously with Pete and that team having the initiative, right? That's their focus. They want to get to a future state with a lower risk profile. They want to be involved in learning and managing. I think in other areas where maybe they're not at that maturity, and I know because we're seeing it, there is becoming more demand and expectation being put onto HTM to say, from the enterprise side, we don't manage these devices, we don't own them. What are you doing about it? Everyone knows that there's risk that's always been there with the IoMT and the OT and even those gray area devices in the laboratory, maybe that a particular organization doesn't acknowledge as a biomed device for them. IT knows that risk is there. But I think we're seeing that the industry getting to the point where, as much as there are HTM leaders like Pete taking the initiative on their own to do these things, I do think we're starting to see the enterprise, especially when they implement a security tool like Mitigate, right? All of the domains are visible in that tool, and it gives the enterprise team actually a whole different perspective of what the medical device environment looks like in their organization. So I think we're seeing more expectation and dialogue and requirements for HTM to do certain things, to address certain risk, that even maybe the enterprise team, due to some of these new tools and visibility, have more insight into what they are and what they're doing. What is the traffic doing on the network, and what is it communicating to internally and externally? I'm sure Pete sees that pressure, but he's been proactive enough that I think he's worked in conjunction with the enterprise team, whereas others are probably they're probably getting more pressure from the organization and data security to do things, and they may be interested in these conversations to understand how they can to do things similar to what Pete has done here, and begin to address some of those issues.
Yeah, thank you. And we're also using Mitigate to profile our medical devices, and we're actually taking that profile, sending that to ICE so that we can validate that that is the traffic pattern that those medical devices should be talking and moving forward with. So, there's a lot more than just the patching, but we're making sure that our devices are communicating to what they should be communicating, and looking at that whole ecosystem of what's tied to that medical device and what other peripherals are around that. And we aren't quite there yet, but that's the future plan is to start looking at building those relationships of the medical device and what and who they're communicating with.
Obviously making progress and taking action on known vulnerabilities, which I think, in the current regulatory state where we're seeing New York add in policies for baseline standards, you are taking that action and moving toward a more secure enterprise, which I think is essentially the future that we're expecting, right? Where we all have these baseline models, and what are you doing about your vulnerabilities? So, but I do have a question. If we can talk more about, like, perhaps if we're not ready for centralized patch management, what should we be doing now to sort of chip away at that, particularly if we know the future state is you must do X, Y, and Z?
Well, I think the future state is really to work with the vendors. They really have got to open up their architecture, not just to put on an embedded operating system, but they've got to come up with a way that we can either put an agent and have enough power to run that agent, within reason, of course, or work with the Tanium group and those types of systems, and see if we can put those on our medical devices. We still have to be careful with patients on the table and stuff, but I think the future really relies on the OEMs to come up with a solution to be able to help us patch those devices.